The sun was just climbing over the rim of the world when the boy stepped out into the stillness, his boots sinking in soft dust. The goats and sheep milled in the corral, steam rising from their flanks in the chill dawn. He leaned against the weathered fence post, watching their restless movement, listening to the faint clatter of hooves against stone. This was a sound he had woken to every morning of his life, a sound that seemed older than his own name. He moved among them with an unhurried gait, checking hooves, running a callous palm over a ewe's spine. The animals trusted him completely. In their world, he was steady ground and quiet water. No one else came this far out on the prairie, unless they had to. It wasn't just distance. It was the way the land demanded you learn its silences before it gave you anything back. By mid-morning, the light had shifted to gold, casting long shadows of mesquite and thorn. The boy drove his herd toward the grazing slopes, the wind tugging at the brim of his hat. He paused often, not because the animals needed it, but because he liked to watch the horizon. Out here, nothing crept up on you unseen, except for change. It was by the cottonwood spring that he first noticed her, a figure in pale fabric, too fine for dust roads, kneeling at the water's edge. She cupped her hands and drank without hesitation, as though she belonged there. The sun lit her hair in a way that made the water itself seem dull. She looked up, and for a moment they simply stared, the air between them stretched taut. "You're far from town," he said finally, his voice carrying the open space. "I wanted to see the land," she replied, her words shaped by a softer accent. She stood, brushing dust from her skirts, but her eyes stayed on him. Not searching for trouble, exactly, but measuring something he couldn't name. He told her about the spring, about the way it never ran dry even in drought. She asked about the herd, whether the life was lonely. He thought of his father's whistle, the nights under a sky so heavy with stars it seemed to lean down on him, and decided it was not loneliness so much as quiet. She didn't answer, only smiled in a way that made him want to follow her anywhere. That evening, he found himself restless. He walked to the edge of the ridge and watched the last light sink behind the mesas. The wind carried a faint scent of juniper and something else he couldn't place. Perfume, maybe, though there was no one near enough of that to be real. When he returned to camp, he saw her again, standing just beyond the glow of his fire. "You shouldn't be out here at night," he told her, but she stepped closer. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it would be like somewhere else." Her gaze flicked toward the darkness beyond the flames, as if the city were waiting there hidden. He felt the weight of his own silence before speaking. "I could go with you." The word surprised him, and yet felt truer than anything he'd said in months. "Marry me. I'll follow you." Her smile was faint, almost sad. "Sell your herd. Come to the city. Then we'll see." She said it as if it were simple, as if the herd were not his blood and bone, the measure of every season he lived. That night, he lay awake under the endless sky, the herd murmuring in the dark. He thought about her eyes, the curve of her voice, the promise, half-formed, half-withheld. The prairie stretched out in every direction, vast and unchanging, but in his mind, a road was already opening towards someplace he'd never seen. By dawn, the decision had already taken root. He stood again at the corral, the animals shifting in the cold light, and felt the first strange pull leaving. Far above, a hawk turned slow circles, patient, watching. The first sale was the hardest. A mottled ram with twisted horns, one he had raised from birth, was led away by a rancher who didn't bother to look back. The boy stood in the market's dust, the coin heavy in his palm, feeling as though a piece of himself had been cut away. The rest followed quickly. Ewes with the soft bleat he knew by heart, lean goats that had followed him across gullies and dry creek beds. Each trade left the corral emptier, the silence in it growing louder. Neighbors watched from doorways, some with confusion, others with quiet pity, but no one asked why. When the last animal was gone, the pen stood bare in the early light, only trampled earth and a few strands were caught on the wire. He lingered there, hand resting on the gate, as though the herd might still return if he waited long enough. But the road was calling now, and her voice was in it. He packed lightly, 2 shirts, a bedroll, the coins bound in a cloth pouch. Before leaving, he walked the land one final time. The spring gurgled as it always had, the water cold against his fingers. He took out the small wooden whistle his father had carved for him as a boy. The sound it made was thin and reedy, scattering into the wind. He buried it under a flat stone beside the spring, pressing the earth down with the flat of his palm. Some things belonged only to the land. The journey was long and unkind. The first week was all dust and sun, his boots leaving narrow tracks across dry flats. Nights were colder than he remembered, the fire's warmth fleeting against the dark. He spoke to no one, save for the occasional rider, who passed with a nod. Somewhere near the river, a drifter shared his campfire, a man with a weathered face and a voice like gravel. Over 10 cups of coffee, the man said, "City folk don't smile for free." The boy didn't answer, but the words stuck to him like burrs. He entered the city at dusk on the 12th day. Smoke rose in thick ribbons from chimneys, the air heavy with the stench of coal, horses, and something sweet and spoiled. The streets were alive with noise, shouting hawkers, rattling carts, the shrill whistle of a train pulling into the yard. He moved through it slowly, as if afraid to break something he didn't understand. She found him before he could find her. A voice behind him called his name, and there she was, dressed in cream-colored lace, her hair pinned in a way that caught the lamplight. She smelled faintly of lilac and something sharper. In the press of the crowd, her hand found his, cool and certain. "You made it," she said, as though it had been inevitable. They walked together through narrow streets until they came to a building with peeling green shutters. Inside, a dim room waited for him. A narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. She told him it was his until she sorted out a few things. Her words quick and light. He didn't ask what those things were. In the days that followed, he saw less of her than he expected. Sometimes she would appear in the morning, bringing bread or coffee, speaking in a voice that carried a smile but kept its meaning hidden. Other times she vanished for days, returning with a scent of tobacco on her dress and a restless gleam in her eyes. The city's rhythms were strange to him. He missed the slow certainty of the herd, the way the land shifted under light and shadow. Here, everything moved too quickly, and nothing stayed still long enough to trust. In the evenings, he sat by the window of his room, watching lamplight flicker on the wet cobbles. The sound of passing footsteps and distant laughter filled the air, but none of it belonged to him. One night, as she left his room, her hand lingered on the doorframe. "Be patient," she said without looking at him. "Good things take time." Then she was gone, the hallway swallowing her steps. He lay awake for hours after, listening to the city breathe, wondering what exactly it was he had followed her into. Somewhere outside, a train wailed into the dark, long and low, like the call of something that couldn't be ignored. Rain slicked the cobblestones, turning the streets into mirrors that caught the lamplight in trembling pools. The boy moved through the alleys with his collar turned up, the weight of the city pressing in from all sides. The noise never truly stopped here. Clanging metal, the clop of horses, the low hum of voices spilling from tavern doors. He told himself he was getting used to it, but the truth was the city felt like a skin that didn't quite fit. Days blurred together. He wandered the markets and docks, seeing her less often. When she did appear, it was in a rush. Her cheeks flushed, her hands cool, her words laced with quick smiles that never lingered. She began asking about his coins, suggesting it would be safer if she kept them for him. "There are thieves in this city," she said, resting her hand lightly on his arm. He nodded but kept the pouch in his own coat, though not without shame for doubting her. The man at the saloon noticed him before he noticed the man. Broad-shouldered, with a limp in his left leg and eyes that missed nothing, he poured the boy a drink without asking. "First time in a place like this?" the barkeep said, polishing a glass. "First time in any place like this," the boy admitted. The barkeep chuckled, but his gaze sharpened. "Don't follow anyone to the edge of town unless you trust them with your life." The warning lingered in the boy's mind, but whenever he tried to picture her as anything but true, the thought felt like a betrayal. He clung to the memory of the spring, of the way she had smiled under cottonwoods, and let that memory outweigh the unease settling in his bones. One afternoon, he saw her across the street, laughing with a man dressed in a fine dark coat. Her hand rested on the stranger's arm, as though it had always belonged there. The boy felt heat rise in his chest, but when she caught his eye, she crossed him quickly, the other man vanishing into the crowd. She spoke of errands and chance meetings, her voice quick and bright, and he chose to believe her. The days that followed carried a strange tension, like the air before a storm. She came to his room one evening, her manner unusually soft. "There's a place I want to show you," she said, sitting beside him on the narrow bed. "Somewhere we can talk about our future." "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow, just past sunrise, near the railway yard." He thought of the barkeep's warning, but her eyes held him steady and certain. "It'll be worth it," she promised. That night the city seemed louder than ever, the rain tapping against the glass, footsteps pacing the alley below. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of the drifter's words, the barkeep's caution, and the sound of her voice saying his name. Somewhere in the distance, a train wailed long into the darkness, and he imagined its smoke curling into the sky like a signal. When sleep finally came, it was filled with shadows, his herd scattering into a horizon that kept pulling away, the spring running dry, her figure vanishing into a doorway he could never reach. He woke before dawn, the dream's chill clinging to him. The pouch of coins lay under his pillow, heavier than it had ever felt. Outside, the first light was just breaking, thin and uncertain, as though even the sun hesitated to rise. The railway yard smelled of wet iron and coal smoke, the air thick with steam that clung to the skin. Dawn bled slowly across the sky, the clouds bruised purple and gray. The boy stood at the edge of the yard, boots sinking into mud, the pouch of coins tucked deep in his coat. He scanned the maze of tracks and idle engines until he saw her. She stepped from behind a rust-streaked freight car, her dress hem dark with rain. Two men flanked her, broad, hard-eyed, the kind of men who didn't bother to hide the weight of the pistols under their coats. Her expression was unreadable. She stopped a few paces from him, the wind tossing strands of hair across her cheek. "You brought it?" one of the men said. His voice was flat, impatient. The boy looked at her, searching for the warmth he had once seen in her face. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her gaze slid to the pouch at his side. "You don't belong here," she said softly, almost as if it were a kindness. One of the men stepped forward. "Hand out. The money. Now." The boy's pulse hammered in his ears. He thought of the herd, the spring, the whistle buried under stone. He thought of every mile he had walked to stand here. Slowly, he reached for the pouch, but a voice cut through the rain. "Walk away from him." The barkeep emerged from between two cars, a rifle steady in his hands. His limp slowed him, but his aim did not waver. The two men shifted, eyes narrowing, hands hovering near their weapons. For a moment, no one moved. Then the first shot cracked through the air, sharp as splitting wood. Steam from a nearby engine swallowed the space between them, and the yard erupted into chaos. The boy ducked as bullets tore splinters from the freight car beside him. Mud splashed his face, the air hot with the smell of gunpowder. When the steam cleared for a breath, she was standing just a few feet away, a small pistol in her hand, her arm trembling. Her eyes met his, not with anger, but with something stranger. Regret, maybe, or resolve. "You should have stayed in the hills," she whispered. She began to raise the pistol, but the barkeep's rifle spoke first. The sound rolled across the yard, and she staggered back, her dress blooming dark at the shoulder. Her eyes widened, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The two men fled into the rain, their footsteps vanishing into the clatter of distant rails. The barkeep lowered his rifle and limped toward them. The boy knelt beside her, the mud cold beneath his knees. Her breath was shallow, her gaze drifting. He leaned close, catching the faintest whisper, maybe his name, maybe nothing at all. Then her eyes fixed on some far-off point beyond him, and she was still. The yard seemed suddenly quiet, the steam thinning, the world narrowing to the weight in his chest. The barkeep's voice broke through, low and urgent. "We need to go before the law comes." The boy looked down at his hands, the rain washing the blood from them, leaving only the cold. He stood slowly, the pouch of coins still heavy in his coat. without another word. He followed the barkeep out of the yard, the sound of their boots swallowed by the rain. By the time the city faded behind them, the sky had begun to clear. They parted without ceremony at a crossroads, the barkeep heading east, the boy turning west toward the open land. The prairie was waiting, wide, empty, unjudging. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the spring, the stone under which his father's whistle rested. As he walked, the wind rose, carrying the cry of a hawk circling high above. He did not look back.